Well, I love that song, the traditional Irish folk tune, Down by the Sally Gardens. And I thought I'd share this lovely Irish folk tune with you to get us in the mood for this week's worship, because our worship series, Blessed to Me, is inspired by the tradition of Celtic spirituality and features the blessing poems from the book Christ Beside Me, Christ Within Me, written by Beth A. Richardson. In the oral tradition of the Scottish Highlands, there are blessings for each and every sort of task, simple or grand. Bless to Me poems bring us into the present, and they help us find the holy in every moment, every person, everything. I'm Pastor Lyda. Welcome to Westchester United Methodist Church, a place where everyone is welcome and all are beloved and affirmed as children of God. And I don't know, you might be wondering, why am I here alone? Well, sadly, I have been exposed to COVID-19 again. And since we film with our masks off, we decided that it would be safer to film without our wonderful worship leaders, Marta and Kimberly. But hopefully, knock on wood, we will all be back next week. Rites of passage come in many forms and are sacred thresholds into new and uncharted territory. These special, sometimes once in a lifetime moments, when surrounded in words and acts of blessing, provide us with courage and assurance that we are not alone and that our next steps are with God. This week, we will explore the moments when we cross a threshold into blessing unplanned, big or small. Our theme this week is passages, special moments. Hear now these words from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37, and I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to them, "Well, what is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "Well, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down to Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." In the movies we see, in the stories we hear, we like to identify with the protagonist. I know I do. We want to be the one who saves the day, who against all the odds does the right thing. Well, in today's story, we want to be like the Samaritan, right? I mean, whenever Jesus tells a story, I know I definitely don't want to be the one singled out as an example of what not to be. So we read that the priest and the Levite are traveling on the same road as the person who was beaten and robbed. They both see him, and they both cross to the other side of the road. I don't know, perhaps they didn't want to get involved. Perhaps they thought that the beaten man was a decoy lying in wait for them. Even if he wasn't, they certainly didn't want to end up like him, beaten and lying bleeding on the side of a road. They were faced with a once-in-a-lifetime moment to surround another with acts of blessing. But they were afraid. Their fear controlled and changed what they could have done, what they could have become. Fear. It feels like there is an awful lot of fear going around right now. There's fear of COVID, fear of making mistakes, fear of war, fear of injustice, fear of the future of our planet, fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of others. And fear, well, it can paralyze us. We are 2 years out from the next big election in the United States, and already we are being told, depending on who is doing the telling, that if that person's opponent is elected, things will get worse. We are told to hate the immigrant, to buy more guns, to take away the rights of those who threaten the status quo, to cross to the other side of the street when we see something that frightens us, to do nothing when those whose skin is not white live each day in a racist system, to do nothing when there are more guns on the streets than people, to do nothing as our planet is destroyed by greed, to do nothing when religion is used as a weapon to cause harm. To all of that fear and hate, we must say no. This parable of the person who loved in the face of fear and uncertainty helps us out when it's scary to say no to the world's culture that we are living in. Confession, I love and I have been greatly influenced by New Testament scholar Amy Jill Levine, and I wish to share some of her teachings from her book, Short Stories by Jesus, about this parable, known as the parable of the Good Samaritan. When we encounter Jesus' parables, Amy Jill reminds us that texts should always take on new meaning as they are encountered by new readers from new cultural contexts. However, she says, texts also have their own original context. The various interpretations of the parable heard today, they're generally good news. What's not to like about helping a stranger or being charitable towards others? But those are not the messages a first century Jewish audience would have heard. They didn't need a parable to tell them to care for others. They were already commanded to love both the neighbor and the stranger. The parable for them would not have been about looking after a fellow human being. And the parable is not, finally, an answer to the question, who is my neighbor? It is more provocative than that. Amy Jill writes that the lawyer's question, who is my neighbor, is a polite way of asking, who is not my neighbor? Or who does not deserve my love? Or whose lack of food or shelter can I ignore? Or basically, whom can I hate? The answer that Jesus gives is no one. Everyone deserves that love, local or alien, Jew or Gentile, terrorist or rapist, everyone. You even have to love your enemies. The laws laid down in Leviticus do not explicitly require the lawyer in our story to love his enemy who lives across the border outside the boundaries of the community. In Jewish thought, you could not mistreat the enemy, but you certainly didn't have to love them. It's only Jesus who insists on loving the enemy. He may be the only person in antiquity to have given this instruction. In essence, Jesus asks the lawyer, are you able to see in the very words of the Torah the equation of enemy with neighbor, and thus the command to love both? So, who is not our neighbor? Jesus has that way of turning everything upside down. When asked, who is our neighbor, we know the answer. It's everyone. Everyone is our neighbor. But when we ask ourselves, who is not our neighbor, the question becomes a threshold for us to cross into new territory. We see a lot of who is not my neighbor in our world today. In churches, we are told to love our neighbor and that everyone is our neighbor, and yet we struggle with exclusion in our policies and practices, and perhaps we are more comfortable sending a check instead of getting up close and personal with those who are in pain. I will admit that I am ashamed to share how many times when I've been more like the priest or the Levite than the Samaritan. When I've pushed the button rolling up my window, waiting anxiously for the traffic light to change, and looked anywhere but at the face of the person standing at that freeway exit holding up a sign asking me for help. Or waiting at line in the drive-thru, pretending to be on my phone, right, so I could ignore the person standing there asking for money. And when moments later, I hear that person thanking the car behind me for their help and saying to them, God bless you. And I realized that I just missed out on not only the opportunity to recognize another person's humanity, but on a moment of blessing. Blessing that I need more than the person offering it. Our theme this week is passages, special moments. How many special moments have I missed out on? Sacred thresholds into new relationships, new opportunities for growth, for compassion, for love, because I was fearful. How many once-in-a-lifetime moments have I missed out on because I chose to cross to the other side of the street? Because I didn't think I was strong enough, or brave enough, or good enough to really see another person's pain. In Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, she shares this lesson she learned from her mom. Don't look away. Don't look down. Don't pretend not to see hurt. Look people in the eye, even when their pain is overwhelming. And when you're hurting and in pain, find the people who can look you in the eye. Don't be afraid to let those moments surround you with words and acts of blessing. The other night I read on Facebook, if you cannot do great things, do small things in a great way. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, the theology of Facebook has come through once again. This is on point with our story today. If you cannot do great things, do small things in a great way. And I thought, okay, I think I can do that. Even if I'm afraid sometimes, even if I act like the priest and the Levite more times than I would care to acknowledge, all of us will find more rites of passage filled with blessing like the Samaritan, and we can act on them by doing a small thing in a great way with love. The story of the Samaritan who takes the time to become a neighbor to the traveler calls us out of ourselves into unlikely kinds of community, ones we may not even want to be a part of at first. I don't know if I will ever have the courage of the Samaritan, but I believe we are all given the courage to look into another's face and be present to their pain. to put aside our fear long enough to step across as many thresholds into the unplanned as we can, and to do at least small things in a great way through love. May your day be filled with blessings, like the sun that lights the sky, and may you always have the courage to spread your wings and fly. This week, you're invited to ask yourself this question that Amy Jill asks. Are we able to care for our enemies, who are also our neighbors? Think about someone, a specific individual or a type of a person or even a group of people whom you consider or have considered an enemy. Insert that person's or group's name into this verse from Luke. You shall love the Lord with your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love, insert that person or group or type of person's name, as yourself. So let's try that together. So you're going to insert the person or group or group of people whom you consider to be an enemy or have considered to be an enemy into this scripture. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love as yourself. Then visualize yourself performing some concrete act of mercy toward this enemy. Thank you for sharing your presence and your hearts this afternoon or this evening or this morning. Bless to me your sharing. Bless to us your presence. Go in peace.